A one-way path to freedom. That's how Boris Johnson likes to describe his roadmap, culminating with a long-awaited Freedom Day on July the 19th. Personally, I'm going to be delighted when we're able to cry freedom, thanks to our vaccine success. I'm booking nightclub tickets. But a new poll by Ipsos Mori shows a terrifying proportion of Brits think very differently. In the survey carried out for The Economist magazine, the polling company found scary levels of public support for keeping restrictions on our lives in perpetuity. They found that 19% wanted nighttime curfews to continue forever, 26% wanted casinos and clubs closed forever, 35% wanted a quarantine for all those coming into the country forever, and 40% wanted people to wear masks in shops and on transport forever. Well, Matthew Holhouse, who wrote up this story for The Economist, came to a concerning conclusion. He wrote, 50 years ago, half of Europe was under governments that from time to time imposed such measures. They survived in part through repression, but also some consent. Are the British people, by character, really so different? And it got me thinking that, looking at the world in 1940, the whole of Europe, from Portugal to Japan, was under one form or other of authoritarian government. The whole of that Eurasian landmass under authoritarianism. Britain alone stood free. And I'd thought, up until now, that there's something intrinsic in the British character that pushed away that sort of fascism and communism, that pushed away that sort of authoritarianism. But potentially now, were we so insulated from that after all? Potentially not. I'm thinking that maybe we came really quite close back then to authoritarianism. Perhaps our mindset is not particularly different. And that entire survey, this idea that a huge proportion of Brits want to curtail our liberties in perpetuity beyond the pandemic, really upsets some of those assumptions about liberty-loving Britain. I don't know, Mercy, what do you think about that?
Well, what could I say about all of that? I mean, I was shocked when I saw these. I just thought, forever? I mean, even after COVID, and some people have been saying, people who have been lockdown skeptics, so to say, people have been saying there are people who actually want lockdown to continue forever, and that's been battered away. No, of course not. There's nobody who wants the lockdown to continue forever. No sane person would want masks to continue forever. These people just want, you know, the restrictions to continue until a sensible time. But this is saying otherwise, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is saying that there are genuinely huge chunks of people who want them to continue.
Throughout this pandemic, I've been very critical of people who claim that lockdowns don't work, that somehow that somehow reducing social interaction between people doesn't reduce virus spread. Of course it does. It literally does. How does putting one person, isolating them from someone else, not reduce virus spread? It does. The people that say that lockdown don't work are just denying that reality. But equally bonkers, potentially more bonkers, are the people who say that restrictions should continue on our lives in perpetuity. I'm sorry to be frustratingly centrist here, but potentially restrictions were necessary during the pandemic. The idea that these restrictions should go on beyond the pandemic is terrifying, and we need to be calling out these nutty, anti-liberty, anti-reality people just as heavily as anti-vaxxers are called out.
Well, let us know what you think. I'm sure you guys will have opinions on that, and we'll put those graphics up later if we can.
Well, moving on back to that survey carried out for The Economist magazine, where Ipsos Mori, the polling company, found levels of public support for keeping restrictions on our lives in perpetuity. Very high levels for these ridiculous positions. 19% want actual nighttime curfews in this country forever. 26% want casinos and clubs closed forever. 35% want a travel quarantine even after the pandemic is over. And 40% of Brits want masks to continue forever, even after this pandemic. Just extraordinary numbers. Well, to speak to us about this and why the public may think like this is psychologist Emma Kenny. Emma, welcome to the show. I am amazed by these numbers. I think it is totally bonkers. Why on earth do 1 in 5 people want a curfew on our lives forever?
Well, I mean, I don't believe the survey, if I'm really honest. I think there'll probably be a much lower level. But if we're going to go with the fact that some people want to keep restrictions forever, part of that will be to do with a traumatizing year where they've been told that they may kill people that they may love. If you've had issues such as health anxiety, generalized anxiety disorder, if you've got OCD, pretty much everything you've been told has been your worst fear volumized. And actually the habits that we in therapy try to break, you've been told to go ahead full throttle and do it more than ever. So we've exacerbated mental health issues. And then I think, if I'm honest as well, part of this is there has been a huge amount of validation for people who are pro rules. So people who go out of their way to absolutely abide by them. There's been a lot of positive strokes and rewardment from society because essentially it's saying I'm a good person, and therefore as a good person I want to be validated. And if you're trying to fit in and belong, something in the UK we're struggling with and have been struggling with for a long time is connectedness and belongingness. If you think about the fact that now there's about 48% of the UK is atheistic, that means many people don't have a common interest. It isn't have a common connection. Suddenly you're in a situation where people do have a common belief, a common connection, and that brings you a sense of community. So I think it's all of those things. I don't think the stats really are that high. I think when I'm dealing with a lot of people, I have a bias. I work with people who aren't very well mentally. Very, very few of those want these restrictions to stay, but many of them feel that they need time to adjust. I think that that makes sense. We've been told we are going to murder people we love, essentially, by just hugging them. That's hard to carry when you have high levels of responsibility and also problematic mental health. So all of that will be a culmination. As you put it, it feels bonkers that people actually feel that way. But I think that it's understandable because of the fact that so many are dealing with basically secondary trauma. They've endured being told these horrible messages for a long period of time. And it doesn't matter why those messages were given. We're dealing with the ramifications. And so polls like this don't surprise me. Again, the final thing I'd say, though, is there does seem to be a lot of rewards at the moment for people who are very, very pro lockdowns and masks. For whatever reason, there does seem to be a pro experience for those individuals. So that kind of reinforcement also helps.
One of the things that I found interesting is that basically the things that more people do had less support for restriction, but the things that less people do had more support for restriction. So, for example, casinos and nightclubs had some of the highest levels of support in that survey for being closed indefinitely. Is this just people sort of thinking, well, I'm not having fun anyway, so no one else can have fun as well?
Yeah, it does sound like the morality police have been there, haven't they? Where do people have a good time in their life? Where do people do things that I might not morally agree with? Nightclubs and casinos. Let's just get rid of all of those and then the moral problem in society is going to dissipate. Also, I think a lot of people, as you said, don't connect with those because they're a different age frame, or they might have negative aspirations as far as what those places may indulge in. I think it would be different if we were saying never allow a church to open again and never allow a football stadium to open again. That's the other thing as well, though. I think what's really nice about the football at the moment is it's helping people to see that there are lots of common threads between us. A lot of these polls, they're about division. They're about telling people a particular story and particular narrative. We know that. But then you've got on the other side of this lovely experience with football where common connections and threads in spite of where you come from and your belief systems. And I think that's probably the bigger mark of humanness at the moment, not these divisive questionnaires that, with respect, I think often can be manipulated to give, shall we say, answers that make the headlines.
I was interested about what you were saying earlier about this sort of traumatising effect of the pandemic and the restrictions. It seems to me like when we're past Freedom Day, when we're learning to live with COVID as a society, when we're sort of through our exit wave of this pandemic, there's going to be a job to do to build back up confidence in people in terms of living our lives. How do we go about doing that?
Gosh, I mean, genuinely, when you look at all mental health conditions at the moment, you know, the Royal College of Psychiatrists have come and spoken about this abundantly. Pretty much every mental health organisation, who maybe were very silent for a very long period of time initially, has now started to come out and talk about these things. We know that there's a tsunami of mental health issues. There were before. But if you have now had a year where people have been socially isolated, children have developmentally been stumped to some degree because they've not been able to see faces and connect with their peers in other ways. Then you add to that eating disorder increases, anxiety increases, mental health issues in general increasing, depression rates increasing. Certainly when we're hearing stories about paths to certain places where people are known to take their own lives being closed off, we have problems that we already had to deal with. But now we've got to be compassionate. One of the things I keep thinking about the 19th, yes, I want restrictions lifted. I want it all to go back to normal. However, I also have to be really caring and compassionate to people who don't want that. There's no point me thinking, well, this is what I want, therefore you've just got to accept it. I have to understand that when somebody jumps back when I'm walking my dog, they're not doing to offend me. They're doing it because they're terrified. So I have to respect that. Likewise, it's very easy for people to say, why are you wearing your mask? Freedom Day's happened. But again, that's not compassionately understanding their pain. People don't do this on the whole because they're virtue signalling or doing it for pleasure. They're doing it because they're scared, they're traumatized, they're afraid, they love their family, they don't want to hurt another human being as well. They're all things that make them good people. Equally, it makes you a good person if you want the restrictions lifted because you want the economy to thrive and children's futures to be taken back. Let's stop thinking that we're all doing things to harm each other. Most of us are doing things to help each other. We just don't necessarily know how to do it in a way that another person can connect with. But no, our actions on the whole, most of the time in human nature, they come from a really good place and everyone is doing their best, even if that best is not your good enough. So let's move forward. People are traumatised. It's going to take time to heal, but we do that best when we're kind to each other.
Well, that's a nice message to end on. Emma Kenny, professional psychologist, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Yes.